A new Wordle puzzle is online. Click on the link to play.
Listening to the following video may give you clues. Please like and share the videos.
Game 2 loss to the Celtics has the Nets grasping at straws. In front of a sellout crowd of 19,156, the Nets were unable to overcome a second-half collapse by the Boston Celtics in Game 2.
Led by Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving, the Nets blew a 17-point lead in the second quarter and never recovered. Then, they coughed up a 13-minute two-run in the fourth quarter to fall behind by 17 points and trail the Celtics 2-0 in the series.
True. After falling to the Brooklyn Nets in Game 2, it's important to take the series with the Boston Celtics to a third game.
Game 1 ended with a 17-point deficit for the Celtics, but the team rallied to win with less than 4 minutes left to play. The team was led by Al Horford, who hit 3 three-pointers, and Jason Tatum, who scored on a steal.
Boston trailed 10 points going into the fourth quarter but fought back to win Game 1. In a win over the Milwaukee Bucks, the Boston Celtics would have locked up the No.
2 seed in the Eastern Conference. If they had lost to the Bucks in Game 2, they would have had to play the Grizzlies, Hawks, and a struggling Bulls squad for the No.
3 seed. If they'd gotten that, the Boston Celtics should have had no choice but to play the Bulls in the first round.
Kyrie Irving, the longest-tenured Celtic from the 2014 NBA draft, has expressed a similar sentiment. In addition to recognizing the Boston Celtics' hard work, Irving also recognized the sport as bigger than his team.
Even though the Celtics lost Game 2, they're still in a strong position to advance to the second round of the playoffs. The Bucks, meanwhile, have lost KHRRRT Middleton and will probably be facing the Chicago Bulls in the next round.
Thus, the Nets have to understand that the Boston Celtics have Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant, who combined for 80 points, 16 rebounds, and 11 assists in Game 2.
The Brooklyn supporting cast could not save the Nets from the blowout loss. Despite the loss, the Nets supporting cast did everything possible to win the game.
This is especially true considering that Boston hasn't lost 4 games in a row since early January. The Nets took a 10-point lead into halftime in Game 2, but were unable to hold on to it in the fourth quarter.
With their lead down to 2 points, the Celtics pulled away for a 114-107 win. That run came after the Celtics had built momentum and switched defense on the Nets.
The Celtics' 14-minute two-run changed the game momentum and made it difficult for the Nets to hold onto their lead in front of their home crowd. Despite Nash's team's impressive record, the Nets are still grasping at straws in the playoffs.
If they lose to the Celtics in Game 4 and fail to advance to the next round, it would be an embarrassing loss and could end the team's season. A premature exit would end Kevin Durant's MVP season and raise questions about the chemistry between Irving and Durant.
Offensively, the first thing to note after the Celtics' victory in Game 1 is that the Nets' offense struggled too.
The offense failed to score enough points to keep up with Boston's aggressive defense. Brooklyn was suffocated on the offensive glass, and the Celtics were able to pick up 15 offensive rebounds.
The Nets' defense was designed to slow Tatum, but that didn't work, as the Celtics used creative screening actions to keep the Nets bench from scoring. In addition, the Nets' offense suffered from some silly lapses that cost them a lot of points.
Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant struggled, and the Nets shot only 31% in the second half. Irving had a season-high 29 points, but the Nets didn't take advantage of their shooting.
Boston finished the game with 7 players in double-digit scoring, and Jaylen Brown had 4 steals and 2 spectacular blocks. With the series tied 2-0, the Celtics must rely on the role players to come up big and get the ball inside.
In Game 2, the Nets started poorly. Jaylen Brown led a 10-0 run for the Celtics.
Peyton Pritchard nailed a 20-foot jumper with 7 minutes left to make it a 1-point game. But the Celtics didn't capitalize on that opportunity and the Nets were forced to go into timeout.
Effortlessly. With Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving leading the way for Boston, it's difficult to say the Brooklyn Nets can't hold on to their lead.
But a second-half run by Brooklyn Nets was insufficient, and the Celtics were able to take the lead back at halftime. And even though they were up by 10 points at halftime, the Nets couldn't sustain the lead against the mighty Celtics.
Brooklyn began the second half with a similar lineup as in Game 1, but the Celtics outrebounded the Nets 36-34 and out-assist them 27-16. And despite the Nets having a large bench, they were unable to capitalize on their 14 turnovers, which turned into 8 points for the Celtics.
Meanwhile, the Celtics' starting lineup featured 5 players who scored in double figures, including Al Horford, Marcus Smart, and Jaylen Brown. Nets players have failed to show any chemistry at all.
The team hasn't changed their defensive schemes, and Kyrie Irving wasn't asked to talk about the lack of chemistry. He said, "We are who we are."
That might close the Nets' window for the season. Nevertheless, the Celtics' chemistry with Irving is something to be envied.
Inefficiently losing Game 2 to the Celtics will leave the Nets grasping at thin air.
Despite a late surge by Brown, Irving, and Curry, the Nets could not sustain a lead against the Celtics. Despite a good performance by Brown and Irving in Game 1, the Brooklyn Nets could not sustain the lead and ultimately fell short of the series.
The Brooklyn Nets are completely outmatched in size and will be outrebounded by the Celtics by 14 in total. The loss on the offensive glass cost the Nets 9 additional possessions.
The Nets' hopes of making this series a game can rest on Irving's excellent play. With Irving on the court, the Nets shot a net plus-minus.
The team was negative with every other starter on the court. If not for the 30 points from the bench, the Nets would have lost the game.
After holding a 17-point lead at halftime, the Brooklyn Nets collapsed in the fourth quarter. The Boston Celtics shot 61 from the field and outscored the Nets by 17 points in the fourth quarter.
With the score 108-107, the Nets desperately attempted to win the game with their superstar duo. The team struggled to string buckets or counter-punching the Celtics.
Despite the efforts of their superstars, the Brooklyn Nets are now in a toes row hole against the Boston Celtics. Only 25 teams have come out of a toes row hole in the playoffs.